skin. That's this week, BBC One After Question Time. We love living in exile.
And it's over to Fiona Bruce and the panel for the start of the topical debate on BBC One.
Tonight we're in Lincoln. Welcome to Question Time. On our panel tonight, we have Helen Whately, who was elected as an MP in 2015. Last year, she was appointed as the Conservatives' Vice Chair for Women. Richard Burgon, Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary and Shadow Lord Chancellor. Before entering Parliament, he was a trade union lawyer, and he backed Jeremy Corbyn to be leader of the party. An Austrian-British businessman born in Germany, he came to Britain aged 10 and is now head of the industrial manufacturing company Siemans UK, which also happens to be the largest private sector employer here in Lincoln, Juergen Maier. Camilla Tominey, associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. She combines political journalism with being a royal correspondent and commentator. And the British businesswoman who took the government to court over Parliament's right to have a say over starting the Brexit process and won, and is now a passionate campaigner for a second referendum, Gina Miller. Welcome to our panel, welcome to all of you, and of course welcome to you at home as well. You can join in, you can argue along from home using hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Join in the conversation. So let's have our first question tonight from John Benson.
Good evening. I'd like to ask the panel, are you prepping for a no-deal Brexit? And have you any advice on what to stockpile?
What to stockpile? Juergen? Fish fingers? Ice cream? There's a bit of that going on at the moment. What are you stockpiling?
Well, we're not in the business of fish fingers, but actually some of the equipment that we provide to manufacturing companies that are manufacturing fish fingers may be the sort of equipment that will be a little bit harder to bring over the EU borders and to be able to service and keep in service a lot of equipment in British factories and also equipment that we supply to British critical infrastructure. Here in Lincoln, our manufacturing operation produces gas turbines that produce power in some of our power stations. And there is no question that we have had to put a lot of effort and are putting effort into working out in a no-deal situation what would we have to do in order to help keeping this.
Are you stockpiling?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't call it stockpiling because it sort of sounds like we've got warehouses full of parts, but we have clearly done a risk analysis of the sorts of parts that we want to keep in stock to keep critical infrastructure going in the UK. I do, however, want to make a point that with the best planning, this is going to be very difficult. Because one thing about British manufacturing, it is hugely, hugely integrated with the European Union. Parts move many times across the borders.
And when you say this is going to be very difficult, do you mean no deal?
I mean
or
no
do you
deal.
mean even the deal that Theresa May is trying to put together now?
No, the question was about stockpiling in the case of no deal. I mean, so that's the question. So the answer is in that scenario, it will be very, very difficult, and there will be disruption in supply chains and therefore in British manufacturing and in British infrastructure.
Helen Whately?
Well, step one, first of all, I would much rather we have a deal. You won't be surprised to hear me say that. And I voted for the deal that Prime Minister brought to Parliament. But clearly we're in a situation where we do have to be prepared in case we get to what we don't want to happen, but if it happens, no deal. And I'm a Kent Member of Parliament. So I've looked very carefully at the contingency arrangements that have been made in the event of no deal and what would happen at Dover and Calais, where we have a lot of our freight going between us and the EU. And firstly, there are contingencies in the event of no deal and delays at the border there. But also what's really important is the reassurance that we've had from the French and from Calais that they don't foresee there being any delays.
But that's all very well, but you've got the large supermarkets, some of the biggest supermarkets, familiar names that we all know, who are expressing deep concern about running out of lettuces, tomatoes, soft fruit. So you might be getting reassurance, but the big supermarkets, and that's their business, they're clearly not reassured at all.
Well, I mean, clearly, it's absolutely right for businesses, and I appreciate from Juergen and supermarkets making preparations in case of things going wrong. And that's the right thing to do, because there is uncertainty around what would happen if there was no deal. But as I say, I think...
Because they're saying we're going to run out.
Well, because if something did go wrong, then they have to think about all the possible scenarios, and similarly, the public sector is doing that as well, and Kent has done that as well, what could happen, and plans have been made in the event of we do have to have lorries queuing up to Dover. But, hand in hand, great deal of effort has gone into actually making sure that we don't have those delays. And as I said, absolute commitment has been made by the man who runs the port of Calais that there will not be delays. And he doesn't foresee, even in the event of no deal, there being any more checks than there are at the moment.
I mean, others are taking different views at other ports, of course. Richard, you've talked about Theresa May running down the clock and the concern about a no deal. Are you secretly stockpiling in your kitchen cupboard?
We're not stockpiling. My kitchen cupboard's empty tonight, actually. I need to fill it when I get back to Leeds tonight. I think we need to listen to what people like Juergen are saying, people from the business community, about the preparations they need to be making. And it's very worrying both for people who voted leave and for people who voted remain. My constituency voted to leave, and we want a deal which enables us to leave the European Union and accept the outcome of the referendum, yet avoids the kind of disaster scenario that is becoming all too apparent and all too much of a threat. I'm afraid that Helen's reassurances don't reassure me, but more importantly, I don't think they're going to reassure people out there. Yes, people who wanted to leave especially want us to honour the outcome of the referendum and leave the European Union, but we can't go crashing out with no preparations, no arrangements, because when that happens, there'll be people who will be trying to use that chaos of a no-deal scenario to push through things that even Margaret Thatcher didn't dream of doing.
What
things
are you
like
referring to?
Selling off our NHS, opening it up to...
Well, hang on, we're talking
States.
about... Richard, in fairness, I think what we're talking about here is supplies, so food, medicine, that kind of thing. Can I just ask, is anyone here actually stockpiling in the audience? You're stockpiling there in the front. What are you stockpiling,
well,
and why?
It began as a joke. This is my Brexit rice, this is my Brexit pasta. But, you know, over the last week, I'm beginning to think I might take it more seriously.
Anyone else actually stockpiling? Yes, you, sir.
I'm stockpiling euros because I plan a lot of holidays back to Europe.
For now. You in the white shirt there.
I'd first like to say, I know Gina gets a lot of slack for it, but I actually admire the fact that, although I profoundly disagree with you, that you're honest about your intentions. And my question is actually for Richard, if you don't mind. I'd like a bit of clarity on Labour's Brexit position. For one reason, I think it's cold tonight, we could all do with a bit of a chuckle. And two, because I've noticed when Jeremy Corbyn talks to people south of Watford, he kind of pretends to be a Remainer. North of Watford, including Lincoln, you hear that he's sympathetic with the Leave cause. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I want to understand Labour's position with some clarity, please. And it'll be the first time.
We'll come back to the original question, but I better give you a chance on that.
Well, it's about bringing people together. It's not about picking a side now.
You also need to bring your own MPs together as well, because quite a few of them voted against
the referendum has been done undusted, but the country is divided. And the point that Jeremy's made when we're arguing for a Brexit, which includes a permanent customs union, a close single market relationship, and no reduction in workers' rights, consumer protections or environmental protections.
That wasn't in your manifesto.
But
we had
hang
an
on,
election and you stood on a different...
Just 1 second. What you wanted to know originally was what does that mean? So what does that mean? What is a close relationship with the single market? What does that actually mean?
It means closely aligned to the regulatory framework
mean
of
in
the single market
with the four freedoms?
Closely aligned to the single market. But the reason we're making this, the reason we're making this suggestion is because we believe that it can bring the country together. Because if people, for example, lived in Huddersfield near me and voted Leave, or live in Hackney and voted Remain, they're actually all facing similar problems of cuts to public services, instability,
employment. That's not the question. The question is, what does your policy mean? So, in terms of a close relationship with the single market, I have to admit, I don't know about you, I'm no clearer. And when you talk about a customs union or the customs union or a permanent customs union?
Well, a permanent,
what do you mean?
customs union would be avoiding the kind of tariffs that could risk jobs in communities like Lincoln and elsewhere, and that's why we're proposing it, as a way of getting Brexit and honouring the outcome of the referendum as Democrats, yes.
And how does it differ to what we've got now? The customs union we're in now?
Because this would be a customs union with the European Union, so it's a customs union, it's not the customs union that exists.
OK, let me just... There's lots of hands up, and I want to give the rest of the panel a chance. The man there in the blue top.
What I'd like to say is I think it's absolute rubbish, really. I think you're all limping before you get kicked in a lot of ways. There's a lot of talk about we won't get lettuces into the country, tomatoes and other produce. I absolutely agree with Juergen. There's going to be disruption, there's no doubt about that. But, you know, in this country, we're resilient. We're going to find a way around these problems. It's going to take a little bit of time. There will be some disruption. But we've got companies and corporations who have already found ways not to pay taxes in this country. Are you good telling me they're not going to find a way to get a few lettuce from Spain to England?
The woman just behind you. Yes.
I just think it's funny that whenever Brexit comes up to, there seems to be a lot of people that are asking what Jeremy Corbyn's doing. You know, Labour aren't actually in government at the minute. The Tories are in government. You know, they're not the political group that's been found in contempt of Parliament. They're not the group that hasn't been able to get a deal. You know, they're not the party that haven't been able to get any negotiations with the EU going. You know, we're 2 years still on and nothing's resolved, but it seems to be that Labour have to do a lot of the explaining for Conservative failures.
In fairness, Richard was directly asked a question and Richard answered it. Yes, the man there with a coat on.
There's the whole argument about there'd be queues at the channel, etc., etc. It shouldn't apply. Every lorry has a bill of lading. It's done electronically when the goods are dispatched. People know when it's coming. It's fairly easy to levy any new tariffs. Why should there be a delay? Why the problem?
Well, there are a number of people who are concerned there might be a delay. Gina?
Can I say, on the no deal, going back to the original question and to your question, I think we're concentrating on the small things, if you like. I know there will be some disruption on that. But actually, there's some really significant big issues about no deal. And it's not to do with trade. Because actually, no deal means no transition. So on the morning of the 30th of March, we would have to have replicated every EU regulatory body and agency. That is, chemicals, aviation, nuclear, finance, everything. There are a significant number of agencies. We don't have one in place yet. Also, we will have, to make no deal legal, a raft of legislation that has to be passed. There are 6 major bills that have to go through the House of Commons, which haven't even started their passage. There are 600 secondary bits of legislation. We've only done 200 so far. No deal should have started being planned for the day they triggered Article 50, if that was the legal outcome, which it was because of my case. They only started planning for it late last year. This is the depth of incompetence. That's why no deal is so dangerous. It's because they didn't start it soon enough. Most other countries in Europe started planning for no deal way before this, like early last year. We do not have the infrastructure. It's not about lettuce or tomatoes. This is about agencies, infrastructure and legislation, all which have to be put in place in 6 weeks. We don't have it. That is the hard truth.
Camilla. Despite what you're hearing from Gina, you're not too worried about no deal, is that right?
I think some people on the panel are stockpiling hysteria. I'm going to stockpile optimism. And actually, because of Gina Miller's case, you kept no deal on the table. Because if the deal doesn't get parliamentary support, the default is no deal. Yep. And some Brexiteers are happy with you for that because they want no deal.
I don't care about happy or unhappy. It was the law.
Okay. Well, that's the reality of the situation. What's interesting when we talk about a people's vote that's meant to be representative.
No, we're not talking about people's vote. We're talking about are we prepping for no deal and are we stockpiling?
On that subject, Fiona, it's important because actually...
Yeah, but that's not the question, Camilla.
No, because we're talking about no deal and this audience is reflecting what general public polling suggests and that actually people are less worried about no deal than politicians and others who are trying to thwart Brexit are making out. And that's because, yes, there may be disruption. People are realists, but people aren't scaremongering as if it's Project Fear all over again. People's lives continue. If there's disruption, they expect their elected officials and businesses to work it out. As you say with the case of lettuce, are people suggesting we're going to be blocking goods coming in? You know, there's been EU-led reports suggesting that 12,000 people are going to die because of a lack of fruit. That's actually preposterous. We're not going to be blocking goods coming into our own country. What on earth would motivate us to do so?
No, but... Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, says a no-deal Brexit means we would face overall tariff rates of around 11% on agricultural products. So you might think we won't get lettuces, and who cares about lettuces? Not my favourite vegetable, I've got to be honest. but no, if prices go up, you are going to start feeling that in their pockets.
Well, other people say that the overall tariff will be 4%. Gove's talk about agriculture, but equally, under a no-deal scenario, when you look at how the Europeans are negotiating this and have said, we will not open the withdrawal agreement, even though there's a parliamentary consensus behind that now, following Tuesday. Look at the consequences for the EU. The consequences for the EU are as damaging. The consequences of no deal for Ireland, and we've had Varadkar very much overplaying his hand, are potentially catastrophic. So all of this talk about, well, what more does Britain have to do? Barnier in Europe asked Britain, tell us what you want. There's now a parliamentary will behind changing the backstop and getting the deal through. You know, you will talk about no deal. Ask the EU, do they want no deal? How much have they prepped for it?
They have,
it's mutually damaging. It's mutually damaging.
It is mutually damaging.
We've got... Juergen, I'll come back to you if that's all right. We've got so many questions on Brexit, and there's so many ways in which we can kind of tackle this particular issue. I just want to come to Graham Potter on your Brexit question. Graham, where are you?
Does Theresa May really think she's going to get another deal with the EU?
Helen, and no surprise, I'm going to ask you that question.
Absolutely, yes, she's going back to negotiate with the European Union for exactly that reason. She has used the words in Parliament that she recognises as a limited appetite for renegotiation amongst the EU. And no surprises, because clearly they'd much rather they stuck with what they've got.
But Helen, can I just ask you just for a minute? Because as I understand it, and do tell me if you think I'm wrong here, what this is hinging on is Theresa May going back to the EU to try and see if she can sort something new about the backstop. Last summer, she said, no technology solution to address these issues has been designed yet or implemented anywhere in the world, let alone in such a unique and highly sensitive context as the Northern Ireland border. What's changed?
So, I mean, I don't think she's...
Seriously, what has changed?
So she's not suggesting it's going to be easy, but there are clearly...
Well, she's saying it's impossible.
Well, there are clearly a set of options to explore, and on the one hand, she's...
But how could it be impossible last summer and possible
well,
today?
there's two things, two areas where I understand that she's looking in and also talking to my parliamentary colleagues about what they would like to see for the alternatives to the way the backstop is proposed. One is to do with making sure that it's very clear that if we went into it, it would be temporary. So that's looking at making sure there are exit mechanisms or time limits. The other is indeed alternatives to having any infrastructure at the border, because clearly she's absolutely committed to not having infrastructure at the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Now, one thing that was particularly interesting last week from Michel Barnier is he said that in the event of a no deal, clearly there would have to be operational mechanisms to make sure that there is no infrastructure at the border, that the checks could be carried out without infrastructure at the border in the event of no deal. So Michel Barnier has indicated that it could be done, that it could be worked out in the event of no deal. Well, if you can do that in the event of no deal, well, surely you can do that in the event of a deal.
Precisely.
Juergen, obviously the EU and Theresa May's team have been trying to thrash this out for almost 2 years now. Don't seem to have come up with something that's keeping everybody happy. What's your view on this?
Well, I think it's a pretty desperate last-ditch attempt to try and keep the Conservative Party together. Because what is actually happening here is there is this group of quite hardline Brexiteers, call themselves the ERG, and I think they are holding their own party, but actually the whole country, to ransom on this issue of them wanting a harder Brexit. Actually, many of them want the no deal that we were talking about just before. And I suspect that even if the EU do budge a little bit, I don't think they will, but they might budge a little bit, but I think it's never going to be enough to actually find compromise with those ERG hardline Brexiteers. So I think the answer has to lie in a stronger consensus, and the Conservative Party can't reach it alone, and they do have to reach out across the House and reach a compromise that is what I would call a more pragmatic, a sensible Brexit.
You're not keen on May's deal either, are you?
Sorry? Well, I mean, actually, on the May deal as it was, which had agreement from the European Union, I was behind that, and I thought that had merit. However, the House voted it down significantly, and to me, the move that should have been made, and actually was first indicated by the Prime Minister, was that we would move towards a more pragmatic, a consensus-driven approach. That didn't happen, and we've lurched into a harder, a right-wing type Brexit, and I think it's bad news.
Young man with that.
So I'm no fan of Theresa May or the Tories.
OK, just get it off your chest, but we hear you.
Yeah, so my question or my statement is, there's all this talk of a no-deal Brexit, there's all this talk of a second referendum, but all it is are the MPs are blocking Theresa May's deal. How about you finally let the people have a say and give the people a referendum on Theresa May's deal?
Okay. Yes, you were the man with the long hair.
Juergen, you were saying that this is a last-ditch attempt to keep the Conservative Party together, but we can see that in both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, there are clear, deep rifts between wings of the party. Would it not be better at this point to split both of those parties into smaller parties? If they can't agree with themselves, at least give them a chance to agree with other people.
Well,
wow,
I mean,
that's one way of looking at it.
I just may come back on that. I mean, you are right. I don't think the Conservative Party alone or the Labour Party alone can resolve this problem. Hence, my point was there needs to be a coming together and a consensus, because actually we know that there is across the House majority for no deal. You know, our Parliament does not want no deal. And I believe that there is actually a broad consensus across the parties that what we want is a more pragmatic and a sensible Brexit. But we're not able to get to that point because we have these hardline Brexiteers who are holding us to ransom and wanting us to move into...
No, just one second, Gina, just 1 second. Richard, I want to come to you on that, because we're talking about consensus. Jeremy Corbyn has been in to talk to Theresa May now. One of your MPs, Lisa Nandy, said of the Labour Party, we have to start compromising, we have to start dropping some of the red lines. She said this just last night, or we'll default end up with no deal. So what red lines would you suggest dropping to find the compromise that Juergen's talking about?
Well, I hear what Lisa's saying, and I do agree that we need to work together across parties to get this consensus, which will get...
But she's specifically saying we need to drop some of our red lines. Do you agree, and are you prepared to do so?
I think our proposal, as it stands, is a compromise, a practical compromise. Look, we campaigned as a party for Remain and Reform. The compromise we're now putting forward is the one outlined earlier, which involves a permanent customs union.
But it's not even supported by all of your MPs. Well, so what kind of compromise is that?
Well, 90% of Labour MPs, for example, backed Yvette Cooper's amendment the other day. 90% of Tory MPs voted against it. So the vast majority of Labour MPs are with one voice on this. But I think that if Theresa May agrees to what Labour's been proposing for a long time, our deal...
What, just drops everything that she suggests and just completely goes with your plan?
No, I think...
Because I can see that would mean her compromising, but not you compromising at all.
But we're a party that campaigned for Remain in reform. We respect the outcome of the referendum and trying to come to a practical outcome. What a Prime Minister should be doing is not negotiating with their own party, but negotiating for the good of the country and bringing people who voted Leave and Remain together. That's the moral duty of a Prime Minister. If she can't do it, then that's a very serious matter for our democracy.
So no compromise from you? Wait a minute. So no compromise from you?
Well, we're compromising that we're prepared to talk with the Prime Minister.
Well, sorry?
The great practical common sense compromise is that we campaign for Remain in reform. We're not refusing to accept the outcome of the referendum. We're accepting and trying to bring people together who voted Leave and who voted Remain. That's the kind of compromising approach.
So you're doing the kicking the can down the road as well?
Not at all.
Richard, you're asking the Prime Minister to come and do your plan, but you guys don't have a plan. You haven't been able to articulate a coherent...
It's not the Labour Party that's asking the Prime Minister to think again. It's the whole of Parliament. She lost her proposed deal by 230 votes, the biggest defeat in parliamentary history. So dissatisfaction isn't just from the Labour Party, it's in the Conservative Party as well and across the House.
Hang on, Gina Miller.
I was going to say, the withdrawal agreement, what baffles me about it is that, on one hand, you've got sort of hardcore Tories who are saying we want to go back and renegotiate the backstop, when on the other hand they're saying we believe that the technology solution is max fact or alternative agreements, arrangements. But if you think they're available, why do you need to drop the backstop? Because you believe the solution's out there, so it's an insurance policy. Why is it such a big deal? Because there are many more things that are wrong with that withdrawal agreement than the backstop. Believe me, it's got 585 pages where we just become servants to the EU. Where actually, for people who wanted to fight for sovereignty, in the common rule book, mutual alignment, the way the resolution would happen in international law, we are giving over everything to the EU under international treaty before we've even started the hard bit of doing the future trade deal. It is complete and utter... the EU just must be laughing at us because it gives them everything and we have nothing. Why are the MPs not all up in arms about the withdrawal agreement, about the whole thing, not just the backstop? Because they're too interested in where they end up in power next. They are not worried about this country. They're just worried about their own jobs.
Let's hear from the audience.
Me, as a young voter, this is to Juergen personally.
Sorry, to who personally?
To Juergen.
To the Conservative?
Yeah,
to Helen?
to the Siemens here.
To Juergen?
Yeah. What annoys me when he said hardline Brexiteers are holding them for ransom, completely disagree. The way I see it is that EU holding us for ransom. It says, because surely we should be in control of what we need to do with our etc. tariffs and jobs, etc. My father works for Siemens, and he completely...
Is he a good boss, Juergen?
Well, come on. Well, he's a union rep, so it's kind of...
Two aren't incompatible, necessarily.
So, another point is, companies like Dyson are moving across to the other countries to move their companies. Would you be still doing the same? Would you be looking at thinking, putting jobs at risk here?
Well, I mean, first of all, you know, the whole reason why I'm arguing the way I'm arguing is that my fundamental responsibility here is to protect jobs here in the UK. That is why I want...
Have you got that in plan for a no deal?
Sorry?
Have you got that in plan for a no deal if a no deal is inevitable?
Well, look, the message I've made is that the no deal scenario would put the most jobs generally in the economy at risk. And look, and this is back to Gina's point. You know, yes, there is going to be short-term friction and fruits and tomatoes and all of that, and I think that will be harsher than people think. But the much, much bigger issue is that the risk of no deal is making businesses think carefully about their investments in this country. The automotive industry has today announced that there has been half the investment in R&D and innovation in British car manufacturing plants than a year ago. A half. Now, I know as a businessman who has got 15 factories in the UK, one of them here in Lincoln, if I carry on that sort of an investment profile in my factories, the future of that factory does not look bright. And that is the big picture here. And that is why I want a Brexit which gives us more certainty than we've currently got, so that we've got confidence to reinvest in our British factories, retain jobs, create jobs for the future. That's my passion.
Camilla, the question was, does Theresa May really think she can get another deal with the EU? Do you think she can get another deal with the EU?
Well, I think the mood music initially from the EU, as it ever is the case, is extremely negative and no, we won't do this, and absolutely not, it's non-negotiable, because that's the key line that comes out of Brussels. And the unfortunate thing is we take that as gospel and look at it as if it isn't a negotiation. We can all say non, nine, etc. We're not opening this. The EU has to look at their own economy at the moment. We've just heard today that Italy is in recession. Over in Germany, they've had the slowest growth in the last 5 years, and actually the growth projection is lower than thought. There's been a report out by the IFO Institute today, which is an institute of German businesses, saying that the EU should be much more flexible. It's in danger of shooting itself in the foot if it insists on not pinkening any of its own red lines in order to get a deal.
But so, Camilla, does it
just
to be flexible become like a game of chicken in the end? Is this the strategy, do you think?
I don't think it's...
Now, let me ask you, is that what you believe, then, is Theresa May's strategy, that she just keeps going with the EU, and it gets to the point where, in the end, hopefully they blink?
I don't think that should be the strategy, but I think if you're getting to a situation with the EU where they're so intransigent that they're suggesting until the nth hour that they're not going to renegotiate, and it's not just technical solutions, these alternative arrangements which Parliament and some Labour MPs, by the way, not just hardcore Brexiteers, have backed behind, hardcore Tories, these alternative arrangements could include, if she can try and negotiate that, a unilateral exit mechanism from the backstop. It could include a time limit on the backstop.
All things that they've rejected so far.
Well, yeah, all these things that they've rejected so far, but they're also staring a truth in the face. If Remainers say that no deal for us is going to be jumping off a cliff edge, then by its very definition, as we are the EU's biggest trading partner, it's not going to look pretty for them, not least when the Eurozone is facing its own economic problems right now.
OK. Let me come to the thing here.
Thank you very much. I've been working, nationally and locally, leading the independent group, and we've been working cross-party and actually running councils, even cross-party, with a whole number of people engaged, round table, looking at what's the best option and focusing in a cross-party way. And I'm just wondering, is this not something that we could have asked for from our government right from the beginning? It feels not so much like Theresa May's deal as Barnier's deal. At a time of this crisis, would it not be right to put party politics aside and really focus on getting the best solutions for our residents?
The man in the glass.
As a Brexiteer, I've been amazed at how much I'm agreeing with what Gina said earlier today. And I think that if Theresa May wants to have a lasting legacy with the Conservative Party, she needs to acknowledge that she got it wrong up front. She didn't get into negotiating this deal properly 2 years ago. If she were to do it now, she's left it too late. So I think with a no-deal Brexit, obviously we have to take the hit on that. I don't think it's a big hit, as we were discussing before, but I think if she really wants to be or keep her party together at the grassroots level, she needs to acknowledge what her associations wanted her to do in negotiating a proper Brexit, rather than what we're seeing now and trying to sort it all out last minute. And as Gina said, the deal that was put forward, the 585 pages, is worse than staying in the EU to many Brexiteers. We just don't see it as the same thing.
OK. There's so many of you have got your hands up. And I'd like to command all of you, but there are a number of other questions that have been submitted tonight, so I'm going to try and get round some other subjects as well, if that's OK. And I should also tell you that Question Time comes from Motherwell next week, and the following week we are in Aylesbury. So details of how to apply for the audience are on the screen. I'll give them again at the end. Come and join us. Right, our next Question Time. Let's move on from Brexit, just for a moment. Deborah Gregory-Jones.
What do the government plan to do to tackle the problem of homelessness and the increasing number of desperate people we see living on the streets of our towns and cities?
Now, this comes in the context of some new figures that have come out today, actually, so let me just update you if you're not aware of these. So, the number of people sleeping rough in England has actually fallen by 2% in the last year. But if you look at the number of people sleeping rough in England since 2010, it's gone up by 165%. And the number of rough sleepers, incidentally, in Lincoln, here where we are tonight, has more than doubled since 2016. Gina?
I have to say that one of the tragedies, before we move on to the question about Brexit, is that we're not looking after our own country. And when you see the families that are being made homeless, we need practical solutions for this, because just giving a few, some millions here and there, we need infrastructure changes, because one of the big problems with homelessness or people staying homeless is that unless you have an abode, you have an address, you can't actually then apply for work, you can't actually get off the streets unless you have somewhere that has an address. So it's got to be some way of us having hostels or some sort of housing that people can get off the street, become stable so that they can then look for work and get out of the system. The other thing is the mental health issue, because there's a lot of problems with people who are on the streets who shouldn't actually be there. And because we don't have the capacity, and this, NHS is struggling to such a degree that we can't get people seen in time, and they then end up on the streets. And I know that's also the case when it comes to women who have got problems with domestic violence, where they don't have enough places. So it's all connected. When you look at all the public services that have been cut back by the Tories for all this time, it actually then ends up with a variety of reasons why people are on the street. So we need to look at that. And then finally, I'd say we also need to look at our housing laws and to see if we can change the usage, because we have so many business areas. And, you look at High Street and you look at office blocks that are all empty. Why can't we have some of those change of usage so we can then have some sort of, people? We should not be having people, children, families on the street in a country that's Great Britain.
Helen.
On that very specific point, there has been change of use, so it is now, you can now convert an office block into accommodation. It's happening in my constituency in Maidstone.
Yes,
but to come to Deborah's sort of overall question about rough sleeping, I mean, clearly it is absolutely awful, and all of us see it. I mean, we see it as MPs going in and out of Westminster.
But the question is, what are you going to do about it? What can you do about it?
I will come to that. I will say, I mean, I recognise how complex it is. Before, as a Member of Parliament, I worked as a volunteer for a rough sleeping outreach programme, trying to get people to come into hostels for the night, and realised how difficult it was sometimes to get people to come in and find shelter. So it's not easy, and there are mental health problems and often substance misuse and domestic abuse as well as part of it. What's the government doing, to your question? Well, firstly, 1.2 billion going to local authorities to help them take action locally. And on the one hand, that's that kind of support around all those issues, and the other, it's on housing. There are a whole set of rough sleeping initiatives happening across the country, and in those 83 local authority areas, rough sleeping has fallen by 23% in the last year. There was also 3 Housing First pilots to particularly focus on helping people into housing, and then so exactly you can help with all these other issues.
So
and
do you
help
think you're sorting it then, Helen?
So I'd say lots is going on, and as we have seen just very recently, as you said in the data earlier, a decrease that's going in the right direction, but absolutely...
Well, hang on. That's a decrease of 2% against an increase of 165%. Yeah. So you mention all these things that you're doing. Is that enough?
Well, so the Housing First pilots are just about to start, but the rough sleeping initiative has been going on over the last year. In the places where they've been happening, we have seen it make a difference. So I think it is rolling this out further, hand in hand, clearly, with increasing the supply of housing, because that is all part of the mix.
The man there in the check shirt.
Yeah, I find myself having to agree with Gina about looking after our own first. With regards to how we could fund that, we have the foreign aid issue, sending 46 million to China, 51 million to India, both of which have space programs. They don't want that money, do they? They don't need it. That money could be put to good use, doing what you said, converting buildings into multiple occupancies for the homeless. In Lincoln today, the leader of the council, I believe it was, said that tourists don't want to see people sleeping on the streets. Well, get off your backsides and help them. Open up these unused shops. Let them sleep in it. Simple.
I'm a student living in Lincoln at the minute, and every time I walk through the city, I see at least half a dozen homeless people. And I'm incredibly surprised for such a small city of that number. And what I also see, and what I've heard, because my girlfriend has lived in Lincoln all of her life, is that these people are simply just moved along. So how on earth, and it's often by the police, how on earth is that dealing with homelessness? I don't think it is.
I'm also a student living in Lincoln, and like this gentleman's just said, there were people sleeping rough on my doorstep last year.
What, literally on your doorstep?
On my doorstep, to my front door, to my flat. We were having to step over people.
And did you talk to them, find out what their situation was?
These people were passed out because they were taking drugs. So it's not a case where I then, as a young woman, feel safe to then go up to somebody like that. But I feel absolutely appalled that you've just said that the Conservatives are investing in councils, when in fact in Nottingham you've just cut council funding by 3/4. It's shocking. Yet if you look here in Lincoln, there are people right outside our doorsteps who have nowhere else to go, who are taking shelters in flats, on the doorsteps of students where we don't have a lot either. It's absolutely disgraceful that you can sit there and say that.
I work for Lincoln City Council and we are investing. I'm not going to go into details about it, but they're doing a rough sleeping team now. They're out being proactive. They've got mental health nurses working part of the team. They're going out speaking to the homeless, and they are dealing with the drug issues, mental health issues, all in one, with community police, and the rough team are out there every day. I've seen it, and the homeless has reduced slightly in Lincoln. I don't know the exact figures, but
well,
Lincoln City
it's
Council
doubled
is
since
working
2016.
on that. They are working on it. That is proactive. They've got the team there, working every day in 2 offices in City Hall, and I've seen it with my own eyes. So, to just clarify, Lincoln City Council are doing something about it.
OK, thank you.
Obviously, people have mentioned a lot of different things, mental health problems. There's a lot of talk of substance abuse. I think, as is the case in other environments, for instance, in prisons, spice has been a game changer when it comes to people living rough. But equally, alcoholism is a massive problem. It's a massive problem for people that sleep rough because, frankly, life is completely hopeless. And people who are sleeping rough are in a vicious cycle. And we all know the scene. We see it every day outside Parliament. There's a few people sleeping outside the entrance and exit we go
And the question is, what should the government be doing about it?
They're passed out. Well, it's very obvious. And this strain of mental health issues that runs through society, from homelessness to teenagers to adults, isn't being addressed. There isn't enough help on the ground. Addiction services have been cut. There's been huge problems. Drugs has got a little bit more money. Alcoholism is, frankly, this kind of secret disease in our society that we don't really address properly. And often it's at the root of very, very many problems. And I've got some personal experience of this because my mother was a chronic alcoholic, and that reminds you, up close and personal, you know, if you get into a spiral of addiction like that, you're not very far from the street. And you get a lot of people who have alcohol problems. They don't have the safety net of a family and a community around them, and there's nothing left. And I think you've got to be talking about prevention here, and you've got to be talking about very early intervention in people who are relying on substances that actually cloud their entire life. I mean, if you're an alcoholic, you're addicted to something, very difficult, not just to get off the street, but to get a job and turn your life around. That's where we should be giving people the help.
Richard Burgon.
Yeah. I think both Camilla and Gina made some very good points. I remember growing up, and other people may have remembered this, hearing about the parable of the Good Samaritan, how it's everyone's duty not to pass on the other side of the road when somebody's in distress. But it seems to me that we have a government that is actually walking on the other side of the road when people are in distress. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and there are people, even in the snow tonight, sleeping on our streets. That is a source of shame for our society, and certainly a source of shame for our government.
So why don't you work with the Conservative government on it? Like that lady said, why don't you make it cross-party? Why does it have to be completely?
We've proposed, and the government should agree, a plan which would release 8,000 extra homes to end homelessness in our country, working with housing associations in a similar way,
These are homes that are currently empty?
Homes that will become empty. So working with housing associations so that when those housing association homes become empty, they can be given for that purpose in a similar way to Right to Buy, the way that process worked in the 1980s. We need the government to make as its moral priority eradicating homelessness in one of the richest countries in the world. And there is the resource to do it. Gina's right when she talks about the other cuts to public services and to local councils, which are causing the increase in homelessness as well, which has doubled since 2010. But the other factors are, we've heard a comment, understand it, about foreign aid, but it's not because of foreign aid that people are sleeping on our streets. We've got some of the billionaires in our country paying less tax than the cleaners that clean their offices. We need some more of that money in the government coffers to help to eradicate homelessness as well.
The woman at the back in the glasses. No, a bit further back. She's got her hand up.
Hello, I'm a housing association manager, a regional housing association in Lincoln, and from my experience, it's the welfare reforms, including the introduction of universal credit, that has created homelessness.
Woman at the back with the blonde hair.
I was just going to say, you've all acknowledged that homelessness is rife, and really austerity has been strangling the nation for the last 9 years. I know you said not to go onto this topic, but Brexit is costing billions. Is it really worth it when this country needs so much help with these massive social issues that we're facing?
Do you think we're wasting money on Brexit? Do you think that the government is wasting money in terms of preparing for no deal? And
yeah, I think that with the chaos that's happened in the Brexit negotiations, I mean, it took minutes for Brussels to come back and say the withdrawal agreement isn't open for renegotiation. MPs won't back a no-deal Brexit, so maybe it's time for the vote to come back to the people.
A few people applauding, a few people not so happy with that suggestion. Juergen, let's come back to the question, which is what can the government do about
I mean, I've got to say, I just want to respond to the lady that just spoke, and, you know, and I do think that this topic we're talking about here, you know, is actually so much more important, and whichever way we solve Brexit, that is not really going to have a massive influence on needing to resolve these really important issues. Now, I spend a lot of time in Germany and Austria, and they have this better under control. It's not perfect, but there is less in the way of.
So what are they doing differently?
Well, and that's
Give Helen some tips.
Well, and that's exactly what I reflect on, and I have reflected on it. I come to two conclusions, and one is in both of those economies there is just a culture and a system that is more preventatively focused. You know, we tend to have a culture where, you know, we let the mental health problem get to a state where it's too late, and actually the intervention at that point is much more expensive. Whereas in those economies, you tend to have earlier services, social services, supporting them and not letting people get into the desperate situations that we see on your doorstep. And that's point number one. And point number two is there is something not right with the overall shape of our economy. And I don't think it's about the rich billionaires. It is just about that the fabric of our economy has taken out too much what I call wealth-creating industries, manufacturing, technology business, the wealth creators that also create well-paid jobs, huge tax revenues, and quite frankly, just gives a German and an Austrian economy more money to be able to invest back into these social services. So that is why I'm a big supporter of the industrial strategy, which is something that as a country we have neglected for 40 years. This is not something that just happened in 2008. 2008. This has been happening for 40 years, and we need to invest more in manufacturing, technology, and create wealth-creating industry so that we can support the things that people need who are in more desperate need.
I'm going to take another question. Angus Pickering.
For better or worse, should Western powers try to interfere with Venezuela's current political climate?
Richard, I'm going to come to you on this first of all, but just to put this in context, so obviously we have President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, who many believe is in position after having after rigged elections. I mean, that's obviously contested by some. There is an opposition leader, Juan Guaidó, who has put himself forward as an interim leader. Meanwhile, Venezuela's economy is in free fall, inflation is through the roof, people are queuing for food, and there are vast exoduses of people from Venezuela in search of jobs and food. Now, a number of Western powers have backed this new kid on the block, Juan Guaidó. He's in his early 30s. Labour hasn't. So, Richard, tell us about your position on this.
Well, I think, first of all, it doesn't do anybody any favours to pretend that the situation in Venezuela is anything other than dire. But we also need to remember that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. One of Trump's top advisers, John Bolton...
larger than any of the countries in the Middle East?
That's right, has the largest oil reserves in the world. That's a matter of record. And John Bolton, who has explained this himself, one of Trump's top advisers, has said that the reason they want to get involved is for that very purpose. The situation in Venezuela is clearly dire. I remember another time when a right-wing, out-of-control US President George Bush got involved in interfering in another country in relation to oil, and that was in Iraq, and of course no one wants to see that kind of thing
So just to be
happen
clear,
again.
you think, because I need to get round the fact, you think Nicolas Maduro should stay in position and the rest of the world should butt out?
I think what we need is a negotiated outcome. The Vatican has offered to get involved. Mexico has offered to get involved in mediated peace talks, and so has Uruguay. I'm very uncomfortable with Donald Trump and the new far-right president of Brazil plucking an opposition leader and declaring them president. This could actually lead, if it goes wrong, to a civil war in Venezuela, which, of course, nobody wants to see. And when there are talks, by the way, the talks should involve all opposition forces in Venezuela, not just the individual that Donald Trump has declared president.
Sorry, shouldn't you be a bit more uncomfortable, Richard, with the fact that the Labour movement supported Maduro? You tweeted in support of this great white hope, this socialist land of milk and honey. Do you regret your praise of Maduro? Do you regret the fact that Jeremy Corbyn went on live TV in Venezuela and celebrated his election? Because it isn't a land of milk and honey, is it? There are people starving on the street, hyperinflation. I think GDP has halved under Maduro.
Well, inflation in Venezuela in November last year was 1.3 million %.
Yeah, they had to stop in Venezuela doing the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire because $1 million is about the price of a loaf of bread.
Gina, briefly.
So, just as I was born right next door to Venezuela in British Guiana, and it was a successful, wealthy, beautiful country. But where we are now is because basically goes back to 2015 when the oil price, forget about having the reserves, actually plummeted through the floor. And then, since then, it was just complete and utter economic mismanagement of that country, which has taken it in the space of 3 years to where it is now. And the fact that you've got, Maduro being lauded for doing this to his own country, to made that country from being stable to where it is now, is just a human tragedy. It is absolutely extraordinary that you're not coming out against him, and also the corruption that's happening and what's happening to people on the street and what's happening to young men disappearing. This is a corrupt regime that has completely mismanaged its country, and you can't have anything but complete and utter compassion for the Venezuelan people and say Of course, it's not just Trump who's coming out to support Maduro. It's many, many people around the world saying that this is a human tragedy. Yeah.
Well, is that the EU and Canada are coming out in support of Juan Guaidó, who's suggesting that he could be an interim president. I know you're not suggesting that Maduro is a great thing at the moment, though. Clearly,
well, you did
Corbyn thought he was not so bad some time ago.
Do you think
do you regret the Labour support of Maduro?
Well, I think we've got to look at the fact, by the way, Venezuela's never been a country...
Yes
where,
or no? That is in fairness, that is a yes or no question,
It's an important point I want to make to give context to my answer. In 1989... a few years before Chavez came to power, 3,000 people were killed in a single day for protesting against the government. The vast majority of people lived in poverty. There wasn't a healthcare system and an education system. That Chavez government did do some good things, similar to the Labour government after the Second World War.
Now, we're talking about
health and education.
Do you regret Labour's support for Maduro previously?
Well, I tweeted, as been said, congratulations to Maduro in 2013 when he was elected by the people as a successor to Chavez, who'd done very many good things. But Venezuela's always had problems.
I still can't hear whether you regret it or not.
We want to avoid a situation of a civil war.
Do you regret it? Richard,
I certainly don't regret supporting the introduction under Chavez, the predecessor of Maduro, of free healthcare and free education. I certainly don't regret that. But where we are now, talking about 2019, I've said it doesn't do anybody any good to pretend the situation is anything other than dire there. But millions of people oppose Maduro's government in Venezuela. Millions of people support it as well. We want to avoid this spiralling into a civil war. It shouldn't be used as a political football over here. It's a serious matter, and another intervention in an oil-rich country from other countries that have caused problems around the world won't help Venezuelans. So if we're serious about helping Venezuelans in this dire situation, we should listen to the calls for negotiated talks from the Vatican, from Mexico, from Uruguay and other countries.
Helen.
I'm just staggered that you're...
Well, Helen, what's the Conservative position?
Well, I'll come to it, but I'm just...
Well, no, we're going to run out of time quite soon,
I'm just staggered that you're defending a regime who refused to hold free and fair
I'll take no lectures from you, I'm afraid, on this. When you were criticised, I'm afraid, for receiving hospitality from the Saudi Arabian royal family, who cut people's heads off and who were bombing people in Yemen. Let's have some consistency on human rights. And you defended the Saudi royal family in Parliament afterwards, and I'm afraid had to then declare you'd received hospitality from those people who have a dire record on human rights.
I feel very strongly about the rights of women in Saudi, and I went to talk to Saudi women to find out what the situation was like for them in Saudi.
Can I just remind you, we're talking about Venezuela.
Yes, I will.
And brief, I'm sorry, you are going to have to be brief, Helen. What's the Conservative position? Do you think Western powers should try and interfere with what's happening in Venezuela right now?
So we support democracies, and the fact that the constitution of Venezuela is being abused completely by its president, who's also starving the country. I mean, it's truly awful. I cannot see how you can defend him. But I understand, as you see Venezuela as an example and a blueprint for the economy, Labour and Jeremy Corbyn's Labour...
But I'm asking you your position. I'm asking you your position, in fairness. So would the Conservatives... I don't know. Do the Conservatives support Maduro being out and this other guy, Guaidó, being in?
So the
and interfering in their politics?
Is if there is not an announcement by Sunday that there will be free and fair elections, then they will... again say, alongside Canada and I think the EU, that Juan Guaidó should be the interim president, because that's Venezuela's constitution. That's their democratic constitution that we're supporting.
Juergen, we are soon running out of time. Forgive me, but
well,
can you give me briefly your view?
We're talking here of a huge humanitarian crisis. It's clearly a failed social experiment to the nth degree, and I find it deplorable that here we're turning this into a local political football. We should be careful about meddling in other people's democracy, but I think when it reaches this level, I think there is a responsibility to say there needs to be a change in regime and there needs to be true democracy, and I'm fully behind, and it's not just the USA, the EU have come out in support of recognising the new alternative president, and as far as I know, we're still a member of the EU, so I think we should absolutely support that position.
For how long, who knows? So many of you have your hands up, but I'm afraid our hour is up. I know we could talk about this issue, and it's a very serious one in Venezuela for some time, but I'm afraid we have to end it. Next week, let me tell you, we're in Motherwell, and the week after that, we're in Aylesbury. You can call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience. Come and join us, or go to the Question Time website and follow the instructions there. And if you want to have your say on tonight's topics, as always, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, which is on 5 Live now and on Facebook Live. My thanks to our panel. Thank you all very much. Thank you to you for being here. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching. From Lincoln, bye-bye.
We're talking through the week's political developments with Andrew Marr and guests. BBC One, Sunday morning at 10.